Hi, this is René O'Connell. I'm the image archivist for the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and welcome to Museum Dogs, which we thought this would be a nice companion piece to our fabulous temporary exhibit dogs. And we will just go there now. Oops. Let's see. All right. I am sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what happened. Let's try this again. Seem to be having a little bit of a lag, but I am now going to, let's see. Are we there? I'm assuming we are on slide one.
Yes, we are. Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So, museum dogs. Kind of went through the collection and decided a nice thing that I think would be fun to look at are dogs that had different roles at the museum. Now, the image archives is full of dog pictures, but I wanted to focus on a couple of things. One is I do have a celebrity dog, so I've included that. And then I'm looking at dogs who actually did work for the museum, as well as some dog owners that were very important to the museum with their dog. So we're going to start with what I call the celebrity dog. And this is Rastafari. So let me back up just a little bit. 1926, Alfred Bailey, who would later become our second director, took a trip with the Chicago Field Museum and Chicago Daily News to actually do some filming in what was then called Abyssinia. And we actually have that wonderful film in the archive. While he was there, he met Rastafari and his family and photographed him with his dog. Only 4 years later, Rastafari would become king of Ethiopia as Haile Selassie. And Haile Selassie loved his dogs, and he had, late in his reign, in the 60s, he always traveled with his dogs, but he had one dog in particular that became very famous, Lulu. And Lulu, I believe, is a descendant of this dog because they look very, 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 very similar. Lulu and Haile had met so many dignitaries and traveled to so many countries that Lulu actually became a minor celebrity and had her own following. And speaking of Bailey, I mentioned earlier that he was the second director. In 1919, after he graduated from college, he was hired by the Fish and Wildlife to go to Alaska to do collecting and field work. And the last 2 years that he was there, 21 and 22, Figgins contacted him and put him on staff to do collecting for the museum. I mean, he was already there. He didn't have to pay expenses. So it was working out really well, which he did. And at that time, he had been thinking Figgins really wanted to expand our exhibitry into Northern Territory's Arctic Circle. So he hires Bailey. Now, one thing we don't hear much about Bailey, we hear a lot about Russell Hendy and Bailey in Alaska, but then there's Jerry. Jerry was his faithful dog and quite a collector in his own right. Bailey found Jerry, well, he knew he was abandoned. He was an abandoned dog in Juneau. And Bailey kind of noticed him, but didn't think much about him, except he would bring his wife and daughter into Juneau for shopping. And you don't really have buggies in Juneau back in those days because it was ice and hard-packed snow. So you had like a little child sleigh that you would put the baby in and the groceries. And when they would go into shopping, they would tie up the sleigh, and Jerry would follow them, sit next to the sleigh, and stay there until they came out of the store, and then follow them to the next store and guard the sleigh again. So, of course, he ended up being adopted by Bailey. And Bailey will tell you the amazing thing about Jerry. He could shoot fowl way out into the channels, and Jerry would swim all the way out, bring the bird all the way back, lay it gently at his feet, and he said he never rustled a feather. So I think Jerry had really the hard end of this whole job. And I can't mention Bailey and Alaska without talking about the major mode of transportation. And this collection of his is just full of beautiful, wonderful dogs, sleds, and their riders. And I particularly love this one of the dog sleds rounding Cape Lisburne, which I think is just a stunning photograph in itself. But Bailey was a stunning photographer. Marie Wormington, cannot talk about the museum much without mentioning Marie Wormington. And here she is with the camp dog that was part of their field season in 1936. And the interesting thing about Marie, aside from being a pioneering woman in the man's archaeological world, she was the first museum staff member to acquire a PhD, and not an honorary PhD, because we had a few of those back then. She was also the first woman to acquire a PhD in archaeology at Harvard. That was the first woman they allowed in the program. And it's interesting to note that there were some professors that did not allow her in their classroom because she was a woman. So she had to sit outside the doors and take notes. And luckily, she did not have those barriers at the museum, and she was there for almost 6 decades. In 1991, this was a really fun, interesting study. The zoology department did population studies of rabbits in different vegetation types. And they performed this at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal for the first half of the 90s. And it was kind of known that the best way to get a rabbit count is to have a flush dog who would flush the rabbits out from their little hidey holes, their burrows, and hiding in the grasses. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be counting a flurry of rabbits just flying everywhere after they've been flushed out. So Harry James, and he is the son of William James, both very big supporters and trustees for the museum. They are the reason we have James Hall on the 3rd floor. And what's really kind of noteworthy about this particular trip in 1918, I mentioned earlier that Figgins had wanted to expand the exhibits into the Northern Territories, Alaska, and beyond, and he hired Bailey in 21. Well, 3 years before that, Harry James had approached him and thought they should go to Alaska. And of course, Figgins was all over that idea, but they really couldn't afford it. So Harry paid 50% of the expenses, which was about, I think, $3,600 at the time. The museum came up with the rest, and they spent 3 months in Alaska and brought back 24 large mammals, including moose. And the moose that's on the 2nd floor is from this trip. Originally it was going to go in a diorama, but the moose was so big he cast a shadow. So they put him out on his own display. If you're like entering the 2nd floor, Explore Colorado from the atrium, you'll see the moose. The other thing I thought that I learned about this trip that I thought was fascinating is when they came back, the government had some project going on where they hired all the tanners in Denver and taxidermists, which was probably the Jonas Brothers. And so the museum had to put their animals kind of on ice because they had no tanners and nobody to process them or to process them quickly enough. And I certainly can't talk about the museum without mentioning Bob Medrock, here with his boxer in San Diego in 1960. You may remember that Bob Medrock is the co-author of the Colorado Birds, the seminal Colorado Bird pictorial that he and Bailey wrote. And he was quite an interesting field man. If you look in the collection in Luna, you have some really fun pictures of him. I don't know how he did this, but back in the 30s, he managed to be in the field with what looked like a very freshly ironed white shirt. He would often wear a tie, and you'd see him in a beret. So he's quite a character. So it was kind of no surprise when I found out that his parents worked in circus and vaudeville. And his personality kind of showed that. I'm going to end with our one of our favorite camp dogs, Javelina. Javelina belonged to the late Mike Getty, who ran the paleontology field cruise from 2013 to a very untimely premature death in 2017. And even though she did have officially a name, Javelina, Mike always referred to her as Dog. So I am open for any questions. And I also wanted to kind of highlight all these images can be found on our online collection in Luna. And this is a great way to get there. You can also, even if you just Googled Luna and Diamanesh, you could find it as well. And I'll see if I can share that screen with you. So I'm just going to take you to a couple of favorite questions while, Memory, I don't know if we have any questions. Did you?
Well, Renee, I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay.
But let's give people a few minutes while you show us some of this cool stuff that's in Luna.
Yes. So while we're doing that, I'm going to bring up again, just to show you I was not lying about Bob Medrock.
I love it.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. And here I've got I think a nice picture of him on a ledge with that chiclet, if I can get. Yeah.
Oh, so cool.
You think about him being that dressed up, I mean, because, that took some work to get there.
Definitely.
They actually pulley down. They actually rappelled down, because this is a bird blind. I don't know if you can see this bird blind down here, right in here.
Oh, okay.
There's the nest. So they would actually spend hours filming the birds in nest.
Oh, wow.
And this is how we got our golden eagle diorama, just as a fun tidbit.
Yeah, very cool. It's always interesting to learn more about the background of the dioramas and everything, because it all does have a special history.
They do. And the field work is really special too. And you can find all the field work in Luna as well.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions, Renee, but I'll ask you one as you sign us out. Do you have a favorite image in the image archive, or can you not pick one?
It's hard to do. I love field work. So, and I love Bailey's field work in Alaska. It's just, to me, that whole collection is just stunning.
Yeah.
He is capturing people in their normal, I think the beauty of what he did, which is just documenting people in their normal lives, not necessarily doing something spectacular, but just trying to find, what people did every day. Yeah. And he was really able to do that. And here's one, I think, I love this one of the sled. The sled dog is just a really good-looking sled dog. If I can get.
I love it. Allie just said, no questions, but listening intently. Thank you, Allie, for joining us. Yeah, well, I think, unless you have anything you want to leave us with, Renee, I don't see any questions, so.
No, just absolutely. If you have time to kill, I would go to Luna, put in dogs, or we actually have a collection called Curator Fieldwork Alaska, or Bailey, Alaska. It's the 1921, the massive collection. And remember, he was shooting with a large format camera that created nitrate film. So it's really stunning to see what he was able to get and some of the action shots he was able to get. Awesome. So yeah, check it out. Yeah. It'll be a great way to kill about 4 hours.
Awesome. Oh, actually, Renee, as we're closing up, I did get one question from Carissa. Carissa wants to know, I may have missed this at the start, but can Renee describe what she does at the museum and how she got there as we close?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm the image archivist, and my job is to manage a 700,000 print and film collection. And that also includes moving image. So an archive typically will cover, and especially archive, just covers the institution. So it is the work of the institution for the last 120 years in pictures. So if a word is worth 1,000 words, I say a picture is worth 10,000 words. And we've got that as early as 1900. So even when they were landscaping and before they ever opened the doors, there was a lot of work going on, and we have that, which I think is fascinating. And it really tells you the history of the work from 1901 to 2020. And it's all there, as well as collections. So I manage that, and my job and what keeps me up at night is how do I manage that in perpetuity? When you have print and film, it's in a way easy. I know how to make that last. I will have it 1,000 years from now. If we are, if it's left undisturbed, it will be there for you to see. The really tricky part becomes when you start talking about digital imagery. And so I manage the photographer. And one thing my photographer has to do is he has to take film too. So he does all his digital work. He's a film guy, right? He started out in film. So we do that to make sure that anything you have, like this beautiful diorama that's behind me, the Alaskan gray wolves, that's a digital image, but I also have it in film and in a large format. How I got here, archives have to have a master's degree from library school. So this is a mid-change career for me. I went back at 50 and started over. I was actually running a high complexity genetics lab in Austin, and it was time for a change.